So Dr. Heather Banis is our Victims Assistance Coordinator for the Archdiocese for the past 5 years. And she has actually also served longer than that as a clinical consultant with the department before she was actually the coordinator. She holds many degrees, including a doctorate in philosophy from USC in clinical psychology. And these things have prepared her well for her ministry. Her 30-plus year career, which doesn't seem really possible, has revolved around teaching at the college level, serving as a school psychologist to several schools, a small private practice, consulting, giving presentations such as this one to various groups, including the USCCB General Assembly, lots of hours of volunteer service in her parish, retreat center, the Red Cross, and other agencies in the area of art therapy, chemical dependency, grief, human sexuality, learning disorders, various psychological issues, and of course, child abuse. Heather's faith journey has also been an important element in her work. She's a convert to Catholicism, and her clinical expertise is tempered by solid spiritual grounding rooted in prayer that enables her to bring a warm, gentle, compassionate, and I would say Christly presence to her ministry and to the people she's called to serve. Heather is our Victims Assistance Coordinator, our coworker, our sister, our friend, and I believe her best and favorite role of all time, Grandma. Heather, thank you for sharing yourself and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Sister Ann Carla. And you're absolutely right. My favorite thing in the world is being Addie's grandmother. I'm almost 3 months into that now. And what a blessing that is. I want to thank you for that lovely introduction. I want to thank Eileen for her exemplary support in this way and her professionalism in all that she does. And I want to thank Louis because he is often translating for me. And I can't imagine that that's very easy because I have a lot to say and I tend to go off script. So thank you to Louis. And most of all, thank you to all of you because at the Chancery downtown, we're doing our best to support you, recognizing that you're really on the front lines, that you're out there in our parishes and our schools and trying to serve and minister to our church and doing so under extraordinarily difficult circumstances for all of us, and then for all the ways that that's impacting us personally. So thank you for all of your time and attention today. Eileen, I think I'm ready for you to switch us over to the PowerPoint, and Addie's grandma will get started. Right. This is actually the third time that I've given a version of this presentation, and it seems to gradually get adjusted and refined a little bit each time that I go. But the first thing that I really want to acknowledge is that the title of this was something that I thought long and hard about and reflected on, trying to think about how to talk about what was happening in our world and in our communities, and also trying to contextualize that in some way. And I was drawing upon information and sources from the professional societies that I belong to and talking with colleagues and friends. And certainly there were plenty of reasons why we could have called this the Great American Trauma or the Perfect Storm or the year from, as my classmates would say when I was a kid, HE double toothpicks, the year from hell. But in the end, I found inspiration from a wonderful little book written, I think, almost 20 years ago now, by Geraldine Brooks. She's one of my favorite authors. And her book is called The Year of Wonders. And it literally tells the story of the bubonic plague and its impact on a village outside of London. And it's told through the perspective of a young woman named Anna, a simple girl who had a pretty simple but very difficult, physically draining and difficult life in a lot of ways. And she really becomes a heroine in the story, discovering things about herself that may never have been revealed if not for the dire circumstances that the plague imposed. And so the year that could have been a year of catastrophe instead became a year of wonders. And that's the theme of Brooke's book. And I'm borrowing that from her with all respect for her wonderful story to talk with you today about a year of wonders and how we can cultivate resilience in the midst of it all. So Eileen, if you'll go to the next slide. The first thing that I want to do is pause for a moment and give serious acknowledgement, serious recognition to the fact that we are living in a time of unprecedented stress. And I take that phrasing directly from the American Psychological Association, and it's their description of how hugely impacted we are as a nation and as a world by all that is going on around us and in our families right now. So all of us in this country, whatever your beliefs, your confidence or lack thereof in the government, in the physicians and the CDC, we're all experiencing COVID in different ways. Some of us are personally becoming ill and recuperating. Some of us are trying to be present to family members who've been impacted. Certainly our day-to-day functioning has changed, and the way that we're able to go through work or school and normal family functions, all of us, one way or another, are being impacted by COVID. Against that backdrop, we've had huge and very difficult times related to racial injustices in our communities. And with all of that has been the backdrop of the economic downturn that we're experiencing. And certainly, again, whatever your politics are, I think it's fair to say that it's been a very contentious political climate and a very difficult one in a lot of ways. So all of us are impacted by those things. Then for some, and in fact for many, you add into that the unique and particular experiences of COVID, natural disasters. I myself, we live, and my elderly parents live about a mile away from the evacuation zone for the Bobcat fire. So we were packing and ready to go, and then unpacking and feeling safe, and then packing again. And then for many of us in the Catholic Church, the release of the McCarrick Report brought another layer of stress and pain into our lives, as whether it touched us in a specific way, like it certainly does for me in my work and in my ministry, or if it touched us in a specific way because we ourselves are survivors or family members or loved ones of survivors of abuse of some kind. So there's that backdrop. And then we move down to the individual losses that have characterized much of the last year. Loved ones who died, and perhaps died away, alone, not with family because of the restrictions imposed by COVID. Weddings or funerals that couldn't be held or couldn't be held as planned. Baptisms that were postponed, and birthdays, landmark birthdays for some people that weren't celebrated as they had been anticipated. And then jobs that were lost, jobs that were changed, jobs that became high risk and felt dangerous, plans that had to be altered, and opportunities lost. My heart especially goes out to all of those young people who would have been making a transitioning to a new grade, from elementary and middle school into high school, and then from high school into college, and instead finding themselves at home sharing Wi-Fi if they had it, sharing computers and trying to move forward through a milestone experience in a very different way than was planned. So we really are living in a time of unprecedented stress, and it is important to just let that sit with you for a minute, because that really is a backdrop for the challenges that we're all facing in terms of our mental well-being, our stamina, and the things that we need to do and can do to address those needs and build resilience. And that's what I'm hoping this will help you do. So Eileen, I'm ready for the next slide. I'm not going to read all of these quotes to you, but suffice to say that sometimes it's helpful to have a context to put around this. So as of January 17th, and that's now a couple weeks old, according to the CDC, over 400,000 people had died from COVID, and that's more than died in World War I, in Vietnam, and the Korean War combined. So just a point of perspective there. And the other key thing to take from this slide is that nearly 1 in 5 adults say their mental health is worse than it was a year ago. 1 in 5. That's huge. That's a huge number, because that's on top of those who already had struggles of some kind, who already had challenges of some kind. And if you keep reading through that slide, you see 71% reported feeling miserable or unhappy, right? Those are huge numbers, absolutely huge numbers. So the scale and scope of all this that we're swept up in, that we're a part of, it's worth acknowledging how profound that really is, how much stress we've all been under. Again, looking at impact, we see study after study after study confirming how stressful the pandemic and all of its consequences have been, and people describing themselves as overwhelmed and even disoriented by it all, so sad, angry and feeling trapped, depressed, anxious, scared. In fact, I was talking with my daughter a little while ago. She's the mother of my darling granddaughter. And I was telling her that I was giving this presentation, and she just started talking right then in that moment about how scary it is to think that you could go to the wrong place or be too close to the wrong person, even if that's someone you love and trust and care about being with, and walk away with a deadly disease. And of course, it's all the more heightened for her because she's got this new baby. But all of us who are in families and have friends, we feel that at some level or another. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And it's also a whole lot to add on to whatever all of the other things are that we're dealing with. But the thing I hope you'll hear loud and clear is that all of these reactions, all of these high statistics, all of these emotional and psychological responses that are so difficult and in some cases so debilitating, they are absolutely normal responses to an absolutely abnormal situation. This is textbook. This is predictable, okay? This is not a surprise at all. This is a normal response to extraordinary abnormal circumstances. And if we add to that, for example, the people that I serve in my ministry who are identified sexual abuse survivors, COVID-19, as in the very descriptive words of Dr. Lucy McBride, has poured lighter fluid on a pre-existing fire. If you are someone who has a trauma history yourself, if you are someone who has mental health challenges yourself, trauma, which is a reaction to feeling unsafe, trauma is only worsened, is only further exacerbated by what's going on around us. So whatever individual experiences you bring with you in your life, COVID added on to that is huge. It's absolutely huge. And then if you or someone you know does become sick, you have that added very immediate and very overwhelming experience of not knowing if this person will survive and not knowing what the implications will be. I was talking with one of our priests by email the other day because I had heard that he got COVID and that one of his family members had died. And so I'd sent a note just to offer support and some comfort if I could. And it was a few weeks later and he wrote me back to thank me for that. And he said, actually, when he got better, the funeral that he celebrated with his family was actually a double casket funeral, that another family member had died as well. So he lost two family members and he himself was struggling with the aftermath of COVID. So this is huge. And I don't want to just be the litany of awful things, but I really want to open up space so that you recognize how this is like a tsunami of mental health challenges. Okay. Nobody expects everybody to be able to stand their ground on the beach and survive a tsunami coming over them without getting knocked off their feet a good bit and feeling like they're flailing and maybe lost. But we're going to focus on how we can build you up, build some strength. So next slide, please. Okay. One of the things that we know is that when we experience trauma, and especially trauma that puts a distance between us and our support system, this is a particularly difficult element of trauma. So Sister was so kind to summarize my experience, and I'm grateful. It does make me feel a little old, I have to confess, but I'm grateful that in the 30 plus years that I've been doing this work, I've learned so much from the people that I have served in those efforts. But one of the things that I'm most humbled by as a clinician is that really the best thing for a trauma survivor is to allow them to be reunited with and just folded into the loving support system that they have, hoping and praying that they do have that. And that I need to, as the clinician, step back and let the strengths of that support system do its beautiful work. The strengths of those attachments and those relationships nourish and sustain that person. And there's very likely a time and place for me to be involved as the professional with expertise, but fundamentally what helps that person who's been traumatized heal is reconnecting to their support system. And let's face it, COVID has made that very, very difficult. We're separated from loved ones on a day-to-day basis. Being with them is a risk and a serious risk. We're separated from them if they have to go into the hospital or if we have to go into the hospital, and we may not be able to be with them in those most important moments, or what feels like those most important moments. And they are, but there are other important moments as well. I'm digressing a little bit because of that. But feeling like your well-being or that of a loved one is threatened and feeling like there's next to nothing you can do about it is very disempowering. It hits us at our very core because we feel like we should be able to do something, we want to do something, but it's very difficult to identify what we can do. And when we feel that way, that's sort of fertile ground for depression, anxiety, and even post-traumatic stress disorder to start to take hold. So trauma is very real in the midst of all this. And it's important that we acknowledge that.
Hold on.
Uh-oh, we're frozen.
Oh, hold on. There
we go.
No
worries.
I found a different way. There we go.
You found a different way. Okay. So what we're talking about today is actually the act of living through trauma. We are all in the process of living through this pandemic and all that it's brought with it and all that we brought to it. And the way trauma works is that and this is something I talk about a lot with the people I serve in my ministry. I can't make the trauma go away. None of us can make the trauma go away. It's something that is happening, has happened, and we can't change that. But what happens is we look at how we're carrying that trauma forward with us. And you could imagine a suitcase that you're carrying with us, or a backpack that you have on your back. And in it are the traumas that weigh on you. And the question is, how are you going to carry those forward? Psychologists and storytellers alike, and our faith is rich with story, right? The Bible is such a wonderful source of story and potential healing. The way in which we integrate what is traumatic with the rest of our life story, with the rest of our narrative, and how much position and power we give to different elements of the story, that is something that we can have control over. And while the story of what has happened may already be written, the ending isn't. We're alive, we're moving forward day by day, and so the end of the story has yet to be written, and you have control over lots of elements of the end of the story. So I talk a lot about this with victim survivors in terms of how much of their sense of self and self-definition do they want to have defined or impacted by the trauma experience of sexual abuse. And then we work towards that as a goal, not to diminish, not to minimize any of what happened or how wrong it was or how impactful it was, but also to say, this may inform who I am, this may significantly impact who I am, but there are also these other elements, and I want to give them weight and power and acknowledge the way that they help define me as well. So as we're living through this, we can think about, how are we carrying this trauma? Are we asking for help when we need it? Are we offering help when we can? Are we integrating our faith and our rich traditions as a source of resilience? Or are we angry? Are we hurt? And is that becoming the dominant theme? And we can look at that, and we can talk to our God about that. We can talk to one another about that, and we can have impact over how the narrative takes shape. So let's talk nitty gritty here for a second. We are blessed, literally physically blessed, wired from the day we were born, before we were born, with an amazing stress system, a system in our bodies where our nervous system, our brain is there to try to help us cope with what gets thrown at us. And it's a wonderful system. That's the system that literally lets you run away from that hungry bear and climb a tree, even though you never thought you could run that fast, or climb a tree, which I've yet to have to actually do. And I'm very grateful, because I've got my doubts about my ability to climb up a tree. But our system literally floods us with those stress hormones, those adrenalines. That's how a parent lifts a car off a toddler when the car has accidentally rolled back on a child. And then 5 minutes later, they can't even, make it bounce on its wheels and on its springs. That's that amazing stress system. And it works really well when we're being chased by a bear. But my guess is that most of you on this Zoom today, or listening to this Zoom later on, that is not a regular experience. There's no way to run from a pandemic. So our stress system isn't wired very well for the stressors that come with COVID, that come with, for example, racial injustice or economic downturn. Most of that stress lives up here in our mind. It's not a bear chasing us through the wilderness. We're wired as part of our stress response to seek comfort from others, to seek social support. That's why I, as the trauma trained clinical psychologist, get out of the way. So a victim survivor can reconnect with their family, their loved ones. Let that work its beautiful healing work. But the pandemic interferes with that. We can't stand at the bedside of a loved one or visit an elderly grandparent and burst the COVID bubble and risk exposure to someone who's vulnerable. Past experience, learning from past experience can also help us to respond to a stressful situation. But the flip side of that, and you can see the pattern here, is that past experience can also make us more vulnerable. And that may be because we've got some kind of experience with a physical vulnerability or the death of someone that we loved because they were exposed to something that is reminiscent of or parallel to COVID. That can be because we ourselves have some kind of physical illness or limitation that we have had to be hospitalized for and it hasn't gone well. Or we felt very scared or very lonely. And so we're anticipating more of the same. And so it can also make us more vulnerable. And our meaning-making systems. And that's a very generic way, but it's certainly a more secular way of describing our faith system, our faith traditions, right? The systems that we use, that we rely on to make sense of the world, they can sustain us. They can help contextualize, but they can also, depending on how they're understood, how they are offered, can also feel threatening to us. So I believe the quote comes next, Eileen. So let's look at this next slide. I think I put it next. Well, no, I didn't, but I'll come back to it. Stay where you are, Eileen. This is just fine. The very nature of trauma is to challenge our meaning-making systems. I see this every day in my work. How could a young child coming to church with their family have been harmed by someone who is supposed to be God's representative, right? The priest or church volunteer or whomever who harmed them? Or take it outside of the church, in the family. How can a child be harmed by the people who are supposed to love them, right? So trauma by its very nature, a tornado that hits one house and destroys one house and one family and skips another. How do we make sense of those things? So our meaning-making systems get challenged by trauma, okay? The way in which that meaning-making system is used in response can either be very sustaining or it can also re-traumatize. And I cite here Jennifer Baldwin, who is a theologian, and she writes, the realization that the core presumptions of faith are inadequate in providing clarity of meaning or support in the face of traumatizing crisis events is for many people what makes traumas so destabilizing. And I just want you to sit with that for a second, because for some people trying to make sense of COVID and the pandemic that the world is experiencing, for some people, that context comes with, well, God is cleaning the earth because of all the sin. Well, then what does that mean if you or someone you love gets COVID or dies? Are you being tagged or tapped as a sinner? Versus a theology that emphasizes God's nearness and God's presence and God's closeness to us as we strive to endure, as we strive to prevail against this. So thinking about the ways in which our theology, our beliefs, our faith traditions are being offered and being relied upon, and hopefully they're being relied upon in ways that nourish and sustain us. Well, here's the quote that I was looking for. This comes right from Geraldine Brooks's book, The Year of Wonders. And I am going to read this with you. For if we could be allowed to see the plague as a thing in nature merely, we did not have to trouble about some grand celestial design that had to be completed before the disease would abate. We could simply work upon it as a farmer might toil to rid his field of unwanted tare, knowing that when we found the tools and the method and the resolve, we would free ourselves, no matter if we were a village full of sinners or a host of saints. Even the ordinary business of cleaning house seemed somehow to have become sacramental. Now, for me, that's trauma-sensitive theology. That's not seeing the pandemic as some punishment that God is wielding against us, but instead seeing how God is with us in the tiniest of acts of cleaning our homes, trying to keep them safe while we persist in the face of these unprecedented times. All right, let's talk about resilience. Psychologists love to talk about resilience. And one of the reasons is because resilience is both innate. We all come into the world wired up, some of us more resilient naturally, if you will, some of us less so, some of us more vulnerable. But resilience can also be learned, which means it can be taught. You can cultivate more resilience regardless of whatever your coming into the world wiring did or didn't provide. So if we think about resilience as the ability or the capacity to bounce back, and I think about like a tennis ball or a racquetball that you throw, and it has a certain amount of bounce, and it does that just by its nature. You throw it down, or you throw it against the wall, or you hit it with the racket, and it bounces back, right? And you've got another shot at it. You've got another chance. Well, resilience is the ability to bounce back, only it may be bouncing back because things are being thrown at you instead of you doing the throwing. And it's made up of a number of things. The ability to make realistic plans, emphasis on realistic, and then the ability to take steps to carry that plan out. A generally positive view of yourself, and a general confidence in your abilities, your strengths, the resources that you have within you. Resilience is heightened when you are a skilled communicator and problem solver, okay, which are definitely skills that can be learned. And it also relies largely on a capacity to manage strong feelings and impulses. And that's, I think, a really important one to focus in on, because we know that everything that's being thrown at us this past 11, 12 months is certainly eliciting strong feelings, and in many times very impulsive reactions out of exhaustion, out of fear and anxiety. What's interesting, and probably no surprise to all of us, but interesting within the psychological research, is how much more emphasis is now being recognized in terms of how spirituality is such a significant component of resilience. When I was in school, grad school, back in the late 1980s, I was told that my faith, whatever it was to be kept completely out of my work, the way I thought about my work, and the way I implemented my work, and that I wasn't to interfere with the faith life or spirituality of any of my clients. That was territory I wasn't supposed to go into. So it's a huge shift for us now to be talking about how spirituality is really quite a significant essence in what we call resilience. If we break it down a little bit more and look at some of the qualities and the things that go with them in terms of what constitutes resilience, we can see it's a combination of qualities and then practices or actions that we do. One of the things that can cultivate resilience as it relates to our spirituality are our rituals of prayer, our rituals of the daily mass or weekly mass, of praying the rosary, of adoration. And we've been challenged with some of those, right? Because it's difficult to go to Mass, or certainly to go to Mass in the ways that we're used to. We haven't been able to receive the Eucharist as often as we would like to. And it's been under very strange circumstances in a lot of ways. So that's been a challenge. But nevertheless, if you can access something through live streaming or on TV, there's a sense that that ritual, that familiar ritual happening is comforting in and of itself, even if it's not all that it is when you're there in person. Connection, being very intentional, and that's a key word in resilience and certainly in coping with this pandemic. Being intentional about the way you spend time with your loved ones and nourishing relationships. The capacity to take perspective, to step back from what is immediately stressful or upsetting or challenging, and try to step back and look at it with a little bit of distance, a little bit of context, and how it fits into your narrative. What can you draw on from your narrative that could inform you in this moment? Here's that word intentionality. And in this context, relating it to things that you do to take care of yourself and things that you do to take care of others, and looking at being more mindful as you do those, so that you're infusing them with the most grace, the most presence that you can, and so they're having the most impact that they possibly can. Creativity. This is a huge component in resilience. Thinking about the workaround, figuring out how to do something differently, even if it's not perfect, it's not all that you'd want it to be, but it comes close, or it offers an alternative experience. So reimagining something, repurposing something. And we've certainly seen that in the ways that we're finding to keep in touch with one another. I've had to help my mom learn how to use one of those portals so that she can connect through Facebook, with her grandchildren and friends across the country, since she's 85 and in imposed lockdown, because my sister and I have them on lockdown at home. So rethinking and using your creativity to find workarounds. And then honesty with yourself and others. And I mean honesty about how you are truly doing, what you are struggling with, and what you need, and asking for support, including support from a professional if you need it. I'm going to assume that most, if not all of you, at some point or another have been on an airplane. And when you go on the airplane and the flight attendant is doing their best to get your attention, to tell you all about the emergency things that you probably don't even want to think about as you're about to take off, that, well, if the plane's going to land on water, wait a second, it's not supposed to do that. If the plane's going to have a drop in pressure, wait a second, it's not supposed to do that, right? But nevertheless, the flight attendants are very clear that if you are traveling with someone who cannot put their own oxygen mask on, put yours on first. Put yours on first, because if you don't have oxygen, you can't help them, especially if it's going to be a struggle because they're anxious and maybe frenetic, or a struggle because they can't move very well, or they're too young, or they don't like having something over their face. If you don't have oxygen flowing into your lungs, you cannot help anyone else. So self-care is more important than ever. It is not selfish. It is not thoughtless. It is an act of compassion, because people are depending on you. And if you aren't taking care of yourself, then they've lost a support system they need. Okay? Perfection is not an option. And I've got to tell you, it's never an option. And that's something I struggle with. I am quite the skilled perfectionist. I have very high standards for myself and make it very difficult on myself. But it is just not an option right now. So being aware of that and being patient with yourself is huge. And if you're beating yourself up for something that you're not satisfied with how you've done that, think about what your best friend would say to you, and then say that to yourself. And awareness. Awareness of how this is impacting you, because that's a starting place for you to understand how it's impacting others. I'm anxious about where I go and who I encounter. And then I think about my 85-year-old mother and how frightening it is for her because she's in a higher risk category just by virtue of her age. And at the very least, I could run away faster than she can, right? So using my own self-awareness as a starting place for empathy and understanding how others are struggling. All right, let's talk about some coping strategies. Coping it's an active thing that we do, and it takes many different forms, and these are in no particular order, but it's important to think of coping as something that you do, even if what you're doing is denying and withdrawing. That's still an action and still a choice, okay? So coping. First and foremost, I would say seek information from reliable sources. Make sure that you are going to websites or listening to newscasts or reading articles from sources that have some credibility. And if you have concerns about that, the Archdiocese, with the help of Isaac Cuevas and Marina Macchio-Cadena, they have become our COVID experts. And they are behind some of those notifications that are coming out through Folder Master. And they have a good way of filtering the valuable from the invaluable information sources. So you've got some resources there. But at the same time that you're seeking information, please limit how much time you spend with the news going on and on and on and on about COVID. That repeated and sustained exposure is not healthy. And as a parallel to that, I'll offer you this. On the day that 9/11 happened, and we were all grappling to try to understand what was happening, and especially in the early moments when we knew that the World Trade Center had been hit, and then quickly knew that the second tower had been hit, but we hadn't quite yet put together what was happening at the Pentagon with what was happening at the World Trade Center, and then what was happening in the plane that went down in Pennsylvania, right? There was a lot going on. As the day went on, and it became more clear that those things had all been connected and contrived, for children in particular, where the news was running nonstop because parents and family members were trying to figure this out and get a grip on what was happening, it wasn't the same plane hitting the same building and a repeated newscast. It looked like planes were hitting buildings all day long. And that's what happens if you've got the news going nonstop, if you've got the TV on nonstop, and this is weighing on you incessantly. So limit how much you expose yourself to that and be intentional. Set some parameters and set some limits and then enforce them unapologetically. Everybody's got their different take on what they're comfortable with, what their threshold is. And I've had many an awkward conversation with people that I love dearly about what can and cannot happen, especially in our family right now, because we've got my elderly parents and then we've got this precious new baby, and trying to navigate everybody who has been waiting for that baby and wants to hold that baby and keeping everybody safe has made for some very painful decisions and discussions. But figure out your parameters, figure out your limits, and then be done with rehashing them, set them unapologetically, and move forward so that you aren't constantly in turmoil about that. Examine, and then if you need to, adjust your expectations, both for yourself and others. I know I've made it a point to try to be extraordinarily patient with other people that I'm interfacing with. Even when I'm trying to schedule vaccination appointments for my elderly parents and ready to, bang my head through the wall on the system that I encountered in those first few days. If we start from a place where we assume that everybody's trying to do their best, it may not be enough. It may still make my life difficult, but if I take the venom out of it, if you will, if I realize that that person is struggling and trying to do their best too, it changes the tone of everything for everyone, and it literally will impact your stress response system very directly. So do what you can. Ask and accept help. Ask for and accept help, and take breaks. Take a break. Take a walk. Take a nap. Tag team with someone if you have to. Give yourself, let yourself watch something mindless on TV for a little bit. But the more you can do that gets you up and out in nature, gets your body moving, puts you in a more positive frame of mind, the better. Focus on what you can do, what you can impact, and try as much as you can to let go of the rest. You can't change everything. You can't fix everything. So focus on what you can. Do your best. And this has been a challenge, I know, in my family and for me, to eat nutritiously, as opposed to going to what are so-called comfort foods that, generally speaking, are not the healthiest. At least my comfort foods, the ones on my list, are not the healthy ones. So think about that, and think about that as a coping strategy. I'm intentionally nourishing my body with healthy food. I'm intentionally nourishing my body and my stress response system with exercise and sleep as best I can, because that's going to make me stronger and more resilient. Breathe. And for many people, the sort of mantra of asking the Holy Spirit to come within you and breathing in and out with the Holy Spirit, that can get you through. That slowing, that centering can get you through a lot of the littler, more irritating, frustrating kinds of things that we encounter. And again, it's lowering our stress response. It's connecting us to our God and helping us to feel God's presence inside of us. And it can carry you through a lot of the stress that we're experiencing. Recognize that we're all grieving. We're all grieving something. Some are grieving more and profound losses like the death of a loved one. But we're all grieving. We're grieving changes and losses and deaths and celebrations. And so think about how you would respond to one another if you were standing on the steps outside the church after a funeral, and the compassion that comes forward in that moment. Redefine your standards of success, or what it means to be productive or to do enough. You get to switch that up. These are unprecedented times. They call for some unprecedented definitions. And remember, I love these words from Saint Teresa of Calcutta. We ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. And collectively, we make up a good chunk of that ocean. So take heart there. All right, to get even more practical, simplify. Simplify as much as you can. Set up a schedule and stick to it as best you can. A schedule that has maybe more flexibility, utilizes those redefined standards of success or of accomplishment, but set up a schedule. That kind of routine and normalcy can be really helpful to us when we're feeling like the world is a shaky place to be functioning in. Try to use new technologies or familiar tools in new ways. I'm no Zoom expert, but I got to tell you, a year ago, I didn't even know what Zoom was. So, you're all here because you figured out Zoom to some extent or another. Pat yourselves on the back for that. Identify and then utilize different resources. Think about ways that you can extend yourself in new ways. Some people who are, I don't know, learning a new language or learning a new recipe or making more time to read than they've done in the past. Make sure you're scheduling in as best you can some kind of time to rest, something that is nourishing for you for the long haul. Think about it as putting on that oxygen mask on your face first, okay? It's that important. Take a look at your narrative, at your life story, and think about how you want to adjust it, how you're going to incorporate all of this into it. Think about the gifts that have been hidden or embedded in all of this. For me, one of the things that I got was basically 2 hours a day. I got 2 hours a day because of my commute, and I'm working from home so much that I have 2 extra hours a day that I haven't had in a long time. There's a gift in that. That's not to say that I don't miss being downtown with all my wonderful colleagues, because I do. I miss their faces and our time together. But I also love the 2 hours I got back. So there's an upside there. Please, please, please move your body, move it every day, stretch it, stress it a little bit, walk a little faster, walk a little farther, run a little faster. But even if you're not a runner, that would be me, just move, get out there. And if you can, in nature, move. Choose an attitude that you really want, not that you've defaulted into, but that you are intentional about. And I referenced to you Viktor Frankl's wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning, which he wrote after his experiences in a concentration camp. And it's hard to imagine more oppressive and hopeless circumstances than the years that so many people spent in a concentration camp of one sort or another. And he came out of that thriving in a way, thriving in the sense that the meaning that he could extract from that and his connection to people there and his hope that this would end. And it changed his life, and his book has changed many lives. Think about ways, maybe some new ways to put your values into action. Here's a small plug for my colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania. They have a website that is dedicated to positive psychology. And if you go and register there at the website, you can take a number of questionnaires that will give you feedback about what your values are and what your strengths are and how you might deploy them in new ways. And in doing that, you're contributing to the scientific efforts at the University of Pennsylvania and in the field of psychology, because they are collecting data on how it is people do that. Practice gratitude. Find something you can be thankful for, even if it's just that you have the breath to say thank you for another day to try again. Offer help and ask for help. And be as intentional as you possibly can. And if this pandemic has given you any sense of space and time to reflect, to step back because you have a 2-hour windfall of time that you're not commuting, think about how it is you want to exemplify the resilience you're cultivating and model it for the people that you love. You'll be serving more than just yourself when you do. This slide and this resource is on the resource slides that Eileen will share. But this slide I wanted to highlight because I know so many of you have children that are in school, whether they're yours and or they're children you're responsible for because you are educators or catechists and you're trying to take care of them. This comes from the National Association of School Psychologists. They have a wonderful website that I always recommend in all of my contact with parents and with educators. And this offers a list of ways in which you can be very intentional about supporting children as they cope with all the implications of COVID, including not being able to go to school, being distanced from their friends, spending a lot of time on screens and trying to learn in ways that may or may not fit well with who they are as learners. And to model for them ways in which you're coping with stress as part of how you support them in their own efforts to cope. Here's the positive upside. This pandemic has brought us so much pain and so much loss, so much stress, but it's also brought us opportunities. And I am one forever looking for the silver lining in whatever storm clouds are hovering over my head. And these are certainly things that I've experienced in different ways. I've cleaned out a closet or two as well. So there's been a sense of simplifying and prioritizing, a sense of renewed commitment to what really matters to me, and then finding ways to act on that, whether it's helping my mom be connected through technology that she doesn't really understand, or myself learning something new. So think about the ways in which there are also gifts embedded, and how those gifts might be a part of your resilience in face of this. These words come to you courtesy of Padre Gotuma. He's a poet and a theologian and peacemaker. That reference refers to the work that he's done in the reconciliation between Northern Ireland and the decades of conflict between Catholics and Protestants, and all that brought with it to the beautiful country of Ireland. And he writes these words, and I have been drawn to his poetry and his reflections for a long time. And somehow these words seem to fit especially well to what we're talking about today. He writes, "Every morning I sit, I kneel, waiting, making friends with the habit of listening, hoping that I'm being listened to. There I greet God, and I greet the God who is more God than the God I greet." And it's that sense of wonder that he has, that sense that God is so much more than I understand today, and will be so much more than I can understand even tomorrow if I understand a little bit more. But there's such an expansiveness in his sense of who God is, and his regular daily reminder of that I find great comfort in that, and I offer that to you. And then I have another offering for you. And I share this with a nod to someone who many of you probably know, Dave Moore, who works here at the Chancery with us and is very involved with the C3 program. He sent this link that, Eileen, if you want to go ahead and start teeing it up. I have watched this so many times, I cannot count anymore, but it makes my heart sing and smile. And while I'll sing along, I'm going to mute myself, because you do not want to be graced with my voice when you've got these beautiful voices to hear. So Eileen, thank you for...
Let me see if I can get it. I forgot to turn on the sound. So hold on. I think I'm going to have to get this up again.
Okay, that's all right. We can be
minute.
patient and wait.
There you go. Just because I forgot the, like I said, this, whoops. Let me get the link. I'm trying to get the link. Okay, hold on there.
We'll get past these ads.
We'll get past the ads. Okay, here we go. Can you hear the music? Can you hear the music? Can you hear the music?
Just 1 second. It starts slow.
Okay, let me go back.
This comes to us from the United Kingdom, I'm all English and Scottish, so forgive me, but I go to my roots. And it's called the UK Blessing.
And I am, okay, let me get out of that. I want to get into new share sound. Okay, I think we got it this time. Heather, do you hear the music?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Lord bless you and keep you.
Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lord, turn his face toward you
And give you peace. Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you
and be gracious to you.
The Lord turn his face toward you
and give you peace.
The Lord bless you
And keep you.
Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you
And give you peace.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
We pray a blessing, manna rain down from heaven. This isn't second guessing, we know that we are protected. May the peace that surpasses all understanding be our message. Grace and favors in your nature, in your
May
essence.
his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations,
And your family and your children.
and the children, and the children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in the coming.
have to confess, I was watching that one morning in the office, and my assistant came in and caught me singing along out loud. But it just fills me up. It just fills me up, and I hope it does you too. Thank you so much for being here with me today and with one another. God bless. God bless.